All right. So here we go with the second episode of the Vido show. And today, all the way from Italy, joining me is Anthony Johnson, who is a longtime friend, really smart guy. Went to college with him, was one of my roommates, and he just does a lot of cool stuff with digital media and has a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And we'll just have a great conversation today. So, Anthony, welcome. Thanks for
Thanks,
doing
Ben.
this.
Yeah, it's good to be on the show. It's funny when you were trying to describe exactly what I do. For some reason, a lot of people struggle with that as well because I had a recent conversation with a friend who visited from out of town, and he was going around explaining to some other people we didn't know, like what we do for a living. And then he comes to me, says two things, and then he says, "Wait, Anthony, what are you actually doing?" So,
Yeah, you have a very
yeah,
fluid job and lifestyle. It seems like you're doing a lot of dynamic projects and videos and all sorts of cool stuff.
yeah, thank you. And we're talking about your new updated status too as the president or the governor of California.
I definitely don't want to be the governor of California right now with all the decisions that are having to be made with coronavirus and how to respond to it. I don't know. That's one of the things I did want to talk to you about, and I've talked to you about it a little bit here and there. Is just
Mhm.
what is the difference, or I guess for listeners, like how is it different? Because we know what it's like here in California. So what's going on in Italy? Because you were all pretty ahead of us, I think, in the shutdown and then the reopening and just kind of what's going on over there with coronavirus now.
Well, that's a really good question because so the lockdown here started, I believe, the first week of March, and then phase two started. I think it was like mid-May, more or less. No, I mean, no, I think so. The phase one was 2 months, and then phase two started beginning of May, and then from May to June, all of a sudden, like it went from everyone, like nobody going outside to life pretty much returning back to normal. And I didn't really go into the office that much until I would say up until about 2 weeks ago. And then now, like we go into the office and it isn't really that much of a concern if there's a lot of people in there. Um, Sometimes we have to wear masks. Other times it's not that big of a deal. But typically, whenever I enter a business, I need to wear the face mask. And then if you're outside, I don't really wear it that much. Some people do. It's just a matter of personal preference and like trying to keep your distance. Some people are better than others, but more or less, I would say within like the if we say that like Italy now is its own bubble, life inside the country is more or less back to normal. It's just there's a lot less people, a lot less tourists, and the economy is still struggling a little bit. But I think there's a little bit more hope now that like you don't have to like when you leave your house before you needed this document called an autodichiarazione, like this self-declaration form. And if you didn't fill it out properly, or if you didn't fill it out at all, or if like what you did was deemed unnecessary, the first fines were I think 150, then 300 euro, and then they went all the way up to 3,000 euro. So
Oh,
imagine, yeah. So imagine like you're in your house and you can't go outside unless you like really like have to go to the grocery store or throw out the trash, and then maybe go for a jog or a run within I think it was like a 500 meter, like 500 meters from your house, so you could run around the block and then that was it.
wow. So do you still have to carry those documents around right now?
No, well, you just like the police can like stop you and ask like I don't know. The police have never stopped me, or I hope they don't stop me and be like, "Hey, like, who are you? Like, have you been tested?" Da, 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 and like, um, I don't know what that process is like. We've had different shooters because I work in TV at the EWTN Vatican Bureau, and we've had different shooters go and shoot footage around here, and they're like, our people were stopped, being like, "Okay, like, why are you out here? What's going on?" But now people are pretty chill. I went for a train ride to not to Paris to Pisa, to Pisa, which is about 3 hours north of here in Tuscany. And it was the first time that I left the region since the beginning of the lockdown. So I hadn't left the city of, well, no, I did leave the city of Rome a couple of times, but I never left. I mean, we call it the region of Lazio, or it's like the county. So I didn't really left the county or region in the past, 4 months or so until last weekend. So that was kind of new for me because I am used to like traveling and going out. I'd say like at least once a month to a different part of Italy or different part of Europe. And then now it's like, I went from having all these liberties as a traveler to like basically being restricted to, find what you can in your own area, if I will say.
Yeah, I'd say that experience is pretty similar to what mine has been in terms of just staying within your county or your city. Have you been able to discover new stuff that was kind of in your backyard, so to speak, that you weren't really aware of before?
That's another good question too, because recently I bought a bike, and before I would have been very afraid to like bike on the streets here in Rome because, especially with the number of people we had here before, like you pretty much are risking your life anytime you take anything with wheels out in the road because it's just utter chaos. And like for me, or if you go to Naples, for instance, if you go to Naples, people say that going to Naples when you cross the street, it's like a sport in itself. Like you have to strategize, you got to think, because if you don't play your cards right, there's a very small percentage that you will get run over by a car. Like it's just
I shouldn't be laughing at that.
Huh?
I said I shouldn't be laughing at that, but it is. I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's I enjoy it. I think it's kind of fun to a degree because it creates like a little bit of excitement. But now the roads are a little bit more tameable, I'll say. I remember, I think at the beginning of the lockdown, I would like rent these like different Uber jump bikes around the city. This was back in March, and there was nobody on the road whatsoever. So it was like, like going around the city, having the whole streets to myself. It was great. That was like the first couple of days. And then it became like a criminal act to be on the street. And then now traffic is more or less back to normal, but the streets aren't that crowded. So if you're on a bike, it's not that bad. And then the Italian government is encouraging people to go out and buy bicycles because they want to like reduce the the environmental footprint of cars in the cities that they have around here in Italy. Because like Venice and other cities, they notice how like because we're all in lockdown and people weren't really moving around, that like all these different things started changing the environment. And they like we don't want to keep the economy in lockdown, but we don't necessarily want to sacrifice like some of the things that we discovered because let's say in Venice, for instance, like before you had a whole fleet of gondolas and cruise ships going in and out all day. And then later on, let's say after all this had stopped, the waters were clear. You couldn't really see through the water before. And this ended up being fake news, but people were showing photos of like dolphins.
Yeah, I remember that.
Different sea creatures, swimming in the canals of Venice. So I think that was fake from what someone told me. But or even like the Tiber here in Rome. I used to think the Tiber was disgusting. It is still disgusting, but it's a lot more pleasant. So now there's a bike lane that goes all the way. Well, even before, there's a bike lane that runs from the northern ring part of the city to all the way to the southern part. So you can bike all the way up and down the river, along the river if you want. And then they just completed a new bike path that goes from the city of Rome to the beach, which is about another 30 kilometers more or less. So, I mean, they want people to get outdoors, and that's what I'm more or less focusing on.
Yeah, I think biking has been it's taken like a huge surge of demand over here. Like I know my brother got a bike, and then I had access to a bike. I didn't buy a new one. It's a really old, crappy one, but I started riding it more just because, it was something to do, to get out. And I think more people are kind of doing what you're saying, just locally kind of exploring and traveling, but traveling closer to home for sure.
Do you still have a motorcycle?
No, I sold one. I mean, I definitely looked at getting one when lockdown here start it because
Uh-huh.
I was just like, I didn't handle it very well at first. It was kind of mentally crushing. But I decided not to for the time being, just because I'm trying to save up a little bit more money at the moment. And, it seemed like if I really wanted it, I would still want it, even if we weren't in lockdown, right? Like if you go back to your ordinary busy lifestyle, would I still ride the motorcycle? And I couldn't give myself the answer yes. So I decided I better not buy it just yet. But I've been pedaling, so I've been doing the manual
Mhm.
bike instead a little bit.
We do what we can, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's getting a little bit better for everyone over there in Italy. I think we're behind you. We had a little bit of a surge the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 weeks that people kind of got really concerned over. It seems to be stabilizing a little bit here. But there's just a lot of questions. I think the biggest one that we're kind of centering on now in the United States is what to do with the schools as school starts approaching. And then obviously, since I'm a teacher, I'm just naturally interested in that topic. So I don't know. What are the schools in Italy doing? Just out of curiosity, if you know.
Schools in Italy, I'd have to do more research on that, because from what I know, I think they're doing all virtual right now. But at the same time, I was talking with our office manager, I think like a week ago, and he has 2 kids under the age of 10, and they're in summer camp right now. And I would have not even thought that they would even have any type of summer camp at all anywhere in
Mm.
Italy right now. But I mean, that's a possibility. So I don't really know what that looks like, at least for education here. I think, well, looking at California too, do you think that do you see this more as a moment of crisis or a moment of opportunity? And how, like, what do you think for education?
Well, I mean, in the United States, I feel like everything is made into a crisis, kind of unnecessarily by the politics of it all. But uh,
Panics. Ah.
yeah, that is so real. But definitely an opportunity is in any challenge, right? There's always opportunity. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question. I feel like it's more of a crisis at the moment, and it's like a really heated debate, so to speak, on whether or not we should have the schools open for students to go. So in California right now, I don't think any of the schools, at least in the Bay Area, are planning on opening. They're all going to start remotely. There might be some counties that are less affected that are allowed to do some form of, hybrid model or whatnot. Because my school was planning to do a hybrid model, but then, as I was saying, with the kind of uptick that we saw, decided not to do it. So it's just been a pretty interesting last couple of weeks with the announcement of the school to go hybrid, but then the state said you can't, so now we're going online. And then last week, the high schools in California announced that all sports in the fall are postponed until after the Christmas vacation. So I mean, I don't know. If I was a senior or a junior or any grade really in high school, or any grade for that matter, that does any kind of extracurricular, I would be just kind of like, wow, this is it's going to be a tough semester here.
Well,
So
I feel bad for kids in general right now too, because you like we never had growing up, we never had to wear a face mask at. So I mean, your students are older, but imagine, kids who are here in Italy. I think if they're under the age of 6, they don't have to wear a face mask, at
mhm.
least when like entering a restaurant or any other type of building. But like that's going to have like some type of psychological effect on, let's say, like this generation going forward when they become adults, and like the way that they perceive the world. So I'm kind of curious what's going to happen going forward, because people talk about our generation, like people our age, and saying like, oh, like the 2008 financial crisis affected us and the way that we see economics, or maybe some people who are a little bit older than us, because we were still quite young at 9/11, changed the way that they see the world. So, I mean, being a kid, let's say, like, imagine we're kids at like 10 years old, and you got to wear a face mask. You can't play sports, you can't go to school. Um, yeah, life is not fun.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who was just sharing a story about, I guess some kids went to go visit a relative, might have been their grandpa or something, and the grandpa asked the kids like, "Hey, well, what have you been up to? How's it going?" They're like, "Literally nothing, Grandpa. We don't do anything fun." And it's funny, but it's
Uh,
they feel that in a more real way than us just talking about it. I don't know how. I mean, part of it, I think we actually might have been a little bit more equipped to handle this because we were homeschooled for such a long period of time. And I think that's what most kids are kind of doing now, right? Like, even though they're attending a public school or a private school or whatever, they're still home, right? Like,
mhm.
they're homeschooled for all intent and purposes. So it's something that I think we might have had a leg up on in that sense, but either way, it's got to be a really tough adjustment for them. I don't think it's easy at all.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that point too, because I had a very similar thought. I'd say back in like March or April, when in the first phase of quarantine, um, I did feel like I had or you had a little bit of like an advantage because of the fact that for a time we were both homeschooled, and doing schoolwork in the house is not something that's like unusual, or like working from home. My For now, like we're doing what's called smart working. I don't know what they call it in the United States, but essentially in my first job after college, so I would go into the office. We didn't really have an office. We had kind of like, it was my boss's apartment and then like the lobby to the apartment building, because he was the default apartment manager because he was making videos for the apartments. It's kind of hard to explain, but
Hmm.
essentially I would go and work from there. I'd say like twice a week. And then if we had a shoot, we would go out and do a video shoot with our clients. Other than that, I mean, I lived, I think, like a half-hour drive away. So I would work from home. Like I would have, like, this is my editing station right now. And essentially, like, we would do like a phone call once, maybe twice a day, go over things, and then continue. So one part is the homeschooling. The other part is like, at least for me as a creative professional, working from home. A lot of people, like YouTubers and other video creators, they don't go to the office. They work from home already. The challenge for them, I think, now is that um, people who make content outdoors, so to say, like they couldn't leave their home. So then it's like, well, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to be creative?
So, like, an increase in competition then for, is that kind of what you're saying there?
Well, I think, well, I'm agreeing with you is that like we had a leg up a little bit, like psychologically, at least at the very beginning, because
Oh, yeah.
we knew what it was like to work or to study from home. And then on top of that, like I already had some training. Well, I wouldn't say training, but experience in smart working just by the nature of my work. That being said, like I really love going to the office and the collaborative element of being in the office, and because creativity, like you need to like bounce ideas off of people and do
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like that. And at this point, it's getting better, but it's still a little difficult.
Yeah, I heard from people that I think we just call it work from home here. It sounds
Hmm.
kind of like what you're saying. One of the interesting things about it is, I mean, I don't know how representative this is of everyone, but people were saying things like, friends of mine who are working from home, like they tend to ask for less help because it takes more time. So, like, for example, like, let's say we're both working in the office and I have a question that I have to ask you, but it's somewhat technical and maybe not easy to write out in an email, which also takes effort, right? And it would be far easier to just go and talk to you about it, take the 5 minute walk and get it over with. But now, if they want to do ask those kinds of questions, they have to like schedule a Zoom meeting or block out, 30 minutes of their day or whatever
Yeah.
to have that meeting. And the meeting might not take 30 minutes, it might take 10 minutes, but on their calendar, they have to block it for 30. So it just kind of like adds to the duration of their day and maybe weakens efficiency and productivity. I don't know, because I don't work from home in that capacity. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing of kind of what you're saying. Like you miss the creative element, and then just like little things that you don't really realize that are valuable that then become, a cost in a sense that you have to build in time for something that you didn't have to before in a way that is more burdensome.
Mm. Well, for one, it's like so you need help, but you're on your own, so you have to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
And then the second part is, so before we put anything on TV, so the program that I work on, the biggest program I work on is called Vaticano, and that's a half-hour news program about the Pope and the Vatican and what's happening here. And typically, the way that we would do reviews, or we call them controls. We don't call, there's no word in Italian for check. We call it controllo. So like, oh, let's do the control. But anyways, so typically we would be in the office. I would finish, we would call it like the master edit. And then my producer or my manager or both would come, we'd sit down, we would watch it together, we'd take notes, we'd comment about it, and then we would make the changes and then upload. Now I got to upload before it was like a 5 gigabyte file to this cloud service that we have. And then they have to go watch it. And then they got to send me the notes.
Yeah,
then
exactly.
And then I make changes to the episode. And then I have to re-upload it and then get their verification again. And then I send it to our studios in Alabama, and then they verify it. Mm-hmm. So like there's the creative process, and then there's like sending all these video files around. And if it's a half-hour program, that's like really difficult.
Yeah, I think it's just all these little things that you don't really realize that you have to plan and make systems for, and all kinds of crazy stuff. So here's another question that you actually prepared, and I thought it was a great question. You were asking, how can people, and I think it's a very relevant question, since people tend to have more free time now than they did 3 months ago. What can people do, or I think you worded it like, how can people monetize and their creative interest, right? Like something that's not really, in a traditional job market, but they like doing it. Like how can they make a living out of it, or something to the effect? I thought that was a really good question. I think you're kind of a living example of it. So
thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're kind of doing the same thing here too. I mean, you like you and I had we had done like a radio show podcast before as teenagers.
Yeah, we should go over that.
Yeah, we should talk about that, later on. But essentially, so this is kind of a question I've had for a long time, and it's something because I live in Rome, which is by nature not a very tech savvy city, and us working in technology is a lot of fun because of that. Because like we feel a little bit more cutting edge than the normal individual. That being said, because when we're at Gonzaga, so I majored in classical civilizations and I minored in broadcasting. From my experience, what I remember is when we would all go around the room and say what our majors were and and people would say like, oh, I'm business, I'm engineering. And I would say, oh, I'm classics and I minor in broadcasting. People would turn their head and be like, well, what are you going to do with that?
I think I was probably one of them at some point.
Yeah. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And over time, and I was in another class, I remember at Gonzaga too, where I think I was in Latin class. So, I mean, I took 4 years of Latin at Gonzaga, and we went around the room, first day of class, and we introduced ourselves. And one of the young women in the class, she said that she was a philosophy and classics double major or minor. And then she added, and thus I'll be perpetually unemployed. And I just went like this, like, whoa, like, you think that because you're studying humanities that you won't get a job? Like, come on, like, think outside the box a little. And then, and I know some, like, I encounter some study abroad students here in Rome who come here for 3 months. Some are studying business, others are studying like literature and history. And I had this one conversation with this young man who was studying psychology. And I think he was a junior, and we were talking about like what he was going to do after college. and he wasn't sure like what to do with like getting a job and things of that nature. So I asked him if he knew anything about Google SEO or coding. And he was like, well, why would I need to do that? And I said, well, you know, a lot of people were like, if they have like a symptom for a problem, they'll like go on WebMD and like search for it, or they'll like look for other things online. And this is something that's very popular. So I said, well, what you and your psychology buddy should do is start a blog, run the platform, and then if you have like experience or certification as a psychologist, and you know how to use like the internet and media, like you'll get hired probably within like a week after college, after you're done graduating, because like they're like, well, we know about like the way. Well, let me say it this way: it's like the
You learned a
internet.
skill.
You learn a skill, but the internet is also like a place where people look for questions when they have problems. So, or they look for answers when they have problems. You know, you have a question, you need an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Google's the place for that. So I don't know what he did, but that's what I encouraged him to do. For myself, I know that part of the reason why I got super into studying history and archaeology, and even my faith too, was because of watching TV and watching documentaries and playing like computer games, video games, and media really influenced me to like have a love and appreciation for like the different humanities out there. And I think many people, if they take like just an intellectual skill that they have, and then pair that with like a tangible skill, and then think to themselves like, how can I put
Mm-hmm.
that together? Then you can be very successful. And especially now with like a lot of things being automated, it's going to take historians, philosophers, and all these other people like up to the next level, because I don't think we'll be expecting robots to philosophize anytime in the near future. We'll expect them to do tasks, but we're not going to expect them to think about life's, you know, biggest questions.
Yeah, there's a lot that you said there that I think is really important. There is that prevalent mindset of, if I study, you know, humanities, English, and subjects that are in the arts traditionally, then I'll be unemployable. Which I know, you know, like I guess there's some truth in that if you're not willing to do kind of what you're talking about and like get experience while you're in college,
Mm-hmm.
doing whatever you can to harness any kind of skill that you can develop, because I think that's really what matters, right? You can study pretty much anything and be successful if you are doing those other things in the background, right? Like I remember you would always be out really late doing all these video edits, and you were constantly learning how to create media, even though you were a classics major, and you really got the most out of your broadcasting. And I think the other thing is too, and what you're saying that's important for young people going to school, is to be willing to take the opportunities that come up, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
pursued opportunity relentlessly. Like you worked at a startup for a while, and then I think you had your own production company for a while, right? Didn't you start one and you were doing
Mm-hmm.
that here, and then you went to Italy? You know, like you took a lot of risks instead of just kind of maybe that, well, I did this, so therefore I should get a job kind of thing, right? Like you got after it. And I think it's more about the mindset and your willingness to work hard and take risks that is going to make you successful than earning the degree, which is more or less a checkbox, so to speak.
I think, yeah, thanks. And I think, like I tell people all the time, so life experience versus college, I would say that if I did, I'm thinking about, let's say, broadcasting here. Remember the year after I graduated, so I worked at a place called Sky Studios in Portland, Oregon for a year and a half after I graduated. And I
And that
remember
was a tiny place, right? That wasn't like a big firm. That was a really small startup too, right?
it was a small startup in the fact that I was the very first hire.
Yeah.
Another funny story was that I sort of, I don't know if I should say this, but we were talking about this later. But I guess I sort of hired myself onto the company.
Yeah, you pitched your value. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, but no, but then I said, "Oh, I'll see you." I thought that he had offered me a job, and I was like, "Okay, cool, let's do it. I'll be up there in 3 months and we can start." And he had no idea that he had just offered me a job. And I was like, oh, I got a job offer. So then I wrote an email being like, hey, looking forward to working with you in July. You know, we're going to produce some great stuff. And Chris, who was my boss at the time, was like, okay. So then, you know, but we made things work, and that was funny. But basically we were having this conversation about in broadcasting at Gonzaga, or GUTV as we called it. There was the work that I was assigned to do, and then there was the, like, as you're saying, like the extra projects that I took on to help take me to the next level, because some people were shocked that, so some people thought that I've been doing video since I was like a little kid. And when in reality, like, I didn't even shoot any video until I went to Turkey in 2012. And we made a travel show there as a part of like our study abroad experience. And I made my first like TV news package. And then, you know, going from there, I kind of proceeded.
And that was that your sophomore year? Just for people who don't know, it's not.
That was between my sophomore and my junior year. So it was
of college,
summer 2012. It was between my sophomore and my junior year. We were in Turkey on a bus for, I think, a month. Yeah, it was for a month, more or less. And it was so, but after that, you know, I always tried to look for different opportunities. I bought a camera the next year. I started taking on clients. And some people were always shocked. Wait, why is Anthony a minor? Why isn't he a major when it comes to broadcasting? And I said, well, it's because I have these clients that I'm working with, and I could be a major, but I think this is more about, like, I already have a major already. I don't need to be a double major. I'm going to treat this as more like a business skill and then add that on here. And then what I do in class was more like the foundation for what I took into the real world. So that being said, if I had just stopped, this was our conversation, convoluted, I know, but you know, if I had just done the work that was assigned to me, I probably would have never gotten that job immediately after college. Like we said that because I didn't have the experience.
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the best things that you can tell young people of any age, but especially those in college, is to do exactly what you did, right? And seek out those extra opportunities to cultivate a skill. And then in doing so, you're going to make connections, you're going to learn from mistakes, which is probably the best lesson that anyone can learn. And all of that is going to make you more confident when you get out of school, because you'll have done some of this stuff already, and make it easy for you to transition into whatever your career might be.
Ben, do you remember the public speaking classes that we used to teach too?
You know, it's funny you say that. I remember, I was thinking about that the other day.
Yeah, because I think when did we do that?
Well, I think you're being generous when you say we. So for those that don't know, I don't know exactly. We must have been summer break in college, I think. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And, you know, being homeschooled, at least where we're from, there's a homeschooling community kind of loosely associated. Yeah, business opportunity there for sure.
Yeah.
And so what we would do, mostly Anthony, I was just kind of there, but he would, you know, organize like these public speaking seminars where he just had kids, you know, come over, and we would teach them various skills, right? Like, how do you read with tone? I remember doing that, right? So we'd read these books and work on voice inflection, and then we'd work on hand gestures and pacing, and just like really elementary stuff. But like, if you're homeschooled, you've never done any of that before. And the parents like it because they get to drop off their kids and they're, you know, hanging out, learning and playing. It's like a camp. So that's a great idea. And another example of just finding a way to build experience, right? I thought that was a really cool thing that you did.
Well, I don't think I could have done it without your help too. So I think you should take at least some of the credit too. And then, I mean, you're a teacher, but you're a teacher now as well. So, I mean, you kind of like built up teaching experience along the road. And then, you know, you've kind of taken like all these different paths too, trying to get to like where you're at. Because you're teaching what, economics now? And what else are you teaching?
Yeah, I teach economics, and then I have, so it's a semester course in California. So in the fall, I teach that. And then in the spring, I teach U.S. government. And then this year, just due partly to COVID and other circumstances, I'm going to be teaching a couple sections of U.S. history. So it's all within the social studies realm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just going back to that, I think that was another thing I want to say about that is, I've shared that with people before and they've been like, oh, were you qualified to do that kind of thing? And I don't know, like what qualifies anyone to do anything? Like I've spent a lot of my life getting qualifications, so to speak, by taking various classes, doing X, Y, and
Mm-hmm.
Z to say that I am licensed or certified, but I don't know that that's necessarily enhanced quality whatsoever. So I'm
Well, I think,
actually, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I think too, you're always going to find people who are better than you at what you do. I know from my experience too. Um, like if I would go and look at like, so if I watch a movie or if I watch anything on like YouTube or such, there are a lot of talented professionals out there, and like in one way, like I am professional, but another way, like I still have to continue to grow my skill set to maybe be moving into like different brackets of, let's say, expertise, skill level,
Yeah.
knowledge. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And something that people can do is, you hear online with a lot of just different motivational speakers, is just get started and then and see what happens. And don't be afraid to call yourself something and then be like, oh shoot, I called myself that. Then now what do I got to do to make sure that when people ask me what I do with that title, I have the experience to back it up, or I have the knowledge to back it up.
Yeah. And I think that's what I totally agree with you. I think that's all I'm saying is that the knowledge and experience that you gain to earn people's trust, that comes from trial and error more than it does any kind of like formalized or standardized training in which you are granted a license.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's what I was getting at more. And um, I mean, I've been having issues with this personally. I don't know if I told you, I have applied to become like a driving instructor where I teach kids to drive just because I think I'm going to have a little bit more free time. Because in
Okay,
the state of
cool.
California, you have to um, like go through 6 hours of behind the wheel training before you get your license. So I applied to do that, and I'm just amazed at like the onboarding process and how long it takes. And it's just long because there's all these various like tests, and I'm not saying you don't need any training. I'm just saying I think we sometimes overvalue training when it doesn't necessarily ensure a higher standard of quality.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have to go and do all these various tests, so to speak, in order to get a license, which then
Mm-hmm.
says you are eligible to do the job, right? Whereas, anyone could go through what I'm going through, right? Taking the test for the DMV,
Mm-hmm.
doing the behind the wheel training with the actual driving instructors who are already certified. But I could go through all of that and still be, a crappy driving instructor because I don't think those things can all necessarily test and control for that. Or even with teaching, right? Like you go through a
Yeah.
teaching school, you get a teaching credential, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every credentialed teacher is a good teacher, right? So I guess the bigger issue that I have with some of this stuff is I think, number one, it inhibits access to the labor market. Number two, it gives people a sense of the public, a sense of like security and quality when it doesn't necessarily equate to that.
Mm. Well, I think too, it's just it doesn't really take in. So, like a certificate isn't necessarily going to show or prove the skill or competency of that person.
Yes.
I think it does. I think it does to a little bit because it shows that they at least like went through a process, and then somebody signed and was like, okay, this person is guaranteed to be cool. Another example. This is this is another example I have is I think I was like checking out like an Airbnb, and Someone had worries. They were preoccupied about like renting an Airbnb, and one of the reasons was because that person was a stranger. I said, "Don't worry, the person's a 5-star stranger. We can trust him."
But there's a difference
Yeah.
between platforms where users are reviewing, because that,
Mhm.
not to get too into economics, but that's pretty much like the market, right? Then reviewing, as opposed to like a
Yeah, sure.
centralized agency that is saying, "Oh, you meet the standard," right?
But do you, so like when you become a driving instructor, can people like rate you and you get like, different, let's say like, or let's say if you're doing real estate, like real estate agents get
Yeah,
ranked even though they all have like the license to do real estate.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. You can still have both. I'm just saying, I think it's more efficient to have the users generate that ranking and that quality benchmark than to have the imposition of all of these, bureaucratic hurdles that you have to get through that really don't seem to do anything but self-serve the bureaucracy. And again, I'm not advocating for no training, and there shouldn't be thought put into people who get hired for these various types of positions. But I think it's something I'm mulling over a little bit in my head, that maybe we don't need as much licensing and government issued certifications as we think we do.
I think if you look too at the internet, like the internet is great because people call it, let's say, a meritocracy. That if you're good at what you do, you'll be successful. If you're bad at what you do, or you're just like not up to par with the audience that you want to reach out to, then you're not going to succeed at that level. That's not to deter people from even trying, because if you don't start, you're never going to know.
Mm-hmm.
But um, you know, what is a as I was saying before, you can do the classes, but if you don't put out the efforts, then what good is the certification saying that, oh, I fulfilled all these courses? The person who's going to hire you is going to say, okay, cool, now show me your work. Because you may have it stated on a piece of paper, but if your portfolio isn't that great, then they don't care what your degree is.
Yeah, yeah, I think I
Yeah.
agree with you on that. So it's a larger conversation, I think, about economics in my head than it is about what we're talking about exactly. But that's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah. So I don't know how we even got to that, but there we are.
We're having a very Italian conversation right now. It's just, it's gonna wind around, and then eventually we're going to like come back to our conclusion. But before we go back to our conclusion,
Are
we
you
have to.
fluent?
That's a really good question. It really depends. I think quarantine was not good for my Italian.
Uh,
That being said, I am fluent. This is funny. I am fluent speaking with some people, and I'm not fluent speaking with others.
do you find it that you have more confidence? Is that because of confidence? Like, I'm more confident talking to this person than I am to that person, just because of your relative comfort level?
Well, yeah, I would say it's pretty much all mental.
Yeah.
And then secondly, it's like the person that you are talking to in a TV environment. Let's say Italian, speaking Italian in TV environment, I can participate in any conversation because I know the vocabulary. I needed to get like something in my house fixed. That vocabulary I'm not as good at, so when I need to pick up the phone and say like, "Hey, like I need this fixed," I have to do a bunch of research beforehand, make sure I know what I'm talking about, and then I proceed.
Uh,
Because I'm not talking about household appliances like every day. But in the TV and the work environment, like that vocabulary is set in stone. Like I know what I need to say, how to move people around, things like that.
yeah.
Um, I use an analogy that speaking Italian is a little bit like hitting in baseball. So like you know like who you are skill wise, right? But you don't know who the pitcher is going to be, and you don't know your comfort level with that pitcher. So when the pitcher throws the ball, like either it's going to be like a pitcher that you're comfortable hitting the ball against, or someone that is maybe going to give you a hard time. Like even the best hitters in Major League Baseball, for instance, may have like two or three pitchers that they just can't hit. Like they can be the best player in the world, but this one guy or two people or three people just give them problems.
Yeah, they got ownage.
Yeah, but then there's a picture that comes up, and they almost have to like, okay, this is a different situation, but like a picture comes up, and then it just so happens that the batters at the plate is like 7 for 10 off of that pitcher, and he's hit 3 home runs out of those 7 hits.
Oh man,
things like that. Yeah, and then on top of it, so sometimes you'll have a good day speaking Italian, and then other days you'll have a bad day. So let's say another baseball reference. One day I may go 2 for 4 with a double and a home run, or 3 for 4, 3 for 5, whatever. The next day I may go into a similar situation, go 0 for 4 with 2 strikeouts. But that doesn't necessarily mean that my skill level was bad. It's just maybe I'm tired and I just can't speak because I've had, so much to do.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, but I have a baseball mind and background, so that's perfect. Which baseball started, by the way. I don't know if you've seen any of that.
Oh, I watched the A's highlights this morning.
What do you think of the cardboard cutouts?
I was very tempted to buy one because I knew about it beforehand. Yeah, I was tempted, but then I saw it was going to cost like $89, and I was like, I don't know if it's really worth. Like, I would have paid, I think, $50, but I don't know. It was too much for me, in my opinion. Maybe I'm like nickel and diming here, but that's okay.
No, it's interesting.
It's cool.
I haven't met anyone who's even considered buying one, so I find it fascinating that you have. Is that in part, you think, because you're just so far away from your most beloved Oakland Athletics?
Hey, these times are special. It's more like, when you look back and talk about these times with people down the road, 10 years, 20 years, family, they're going to ask, like, what was coronavirus like? And I always think of funny things that you can bring up in a conversation. And one of those things would have been, oh, well, I was actually at every single A's game during, because I had a cardboard cutout. And here's my cardboard cutout, and like it hangs on the wall. You can see it. Why not?
Well, now I almost want you to get one. I'm gonna have to donate to your fund or something.
Yeah,
I think you get it at the end of the year, and if a foul ball hits your cutout, they'll like mail you the foul ball or something, is my understanding.
I heard something like that. And then you get 2 free exhibition tickets for next year. Granted, if like they let fans in, we'll see. Did you hear about Tom Hanks and his cutout at the A's stadium?
No, he has one at the A's?
So I didn't know about this at all, but Tom Hanks used to be a food vendor in the Coliseum when he was a kid.
Really?
Yeah. And so the A's, I don't know if this was a real image or they had like photoshopped Tom Hanks as like 20 years old and then turned into like a hot dog vendor and made a cutout. But if you go to an A's game, well, we can't go to A's games, but at the A's games, if you listen, you can hear Tom Hanks' voice saying, hot dogs, get your hot dogs.
Oh, and the audio that they're piping in?
Yeah, so if you go on Google and you research this, you can actually watch, like, the A's did this short video showing Tom Hanks as a cardboard cutout going around the A's stadium, like saying like, hey, get your peanuts.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So we have so now we can add Tom Hanks, I think Mrs. Fields cookies. Mrs. Fields used to work at the A's, and then MC Hammer was a clubby in the clubhouse. I think in like the 80s or the 70s, I forget when. So
it's a pretty all-star lineup of employees.
Yeah, we have to continue with the growth. The thing that blew me though, so you brought up the cardboard cutouts. Did you see what Fox Sports is doing with the virtual fans?
No, I haven't seen that.
I don't know when Fox is going to broadcast their first game, but the fans are going to be computer generated in the stands. It's not going to be an empty stadium.
Are they going to be animations of real people or just people as in the video game kind of
like a video game? So you're going to be seeing a real players on the field.
Wow.
And then when they cut to the crowd, you're going to be seeing, digital projections of people.
Wow, that is going to be something to see. I hadn't heard that yet.
I found out about it yesterday. So,
wow.
To me, it's crazy. I think that like one day we're going to wear like a VR headset and then my hologram is going to appear at the Colosseum, and then I'm going to have like this certain perspective where like maybe like I may be in Italy, but I can strap on a headset, put my hologram in the seats, and then like maybe other people who are like friends and family can also like join in too.
Oh, wow.
This is something I thought of, like, because if they do this, maybe something like that isn't that far down the road. That's my thought.
Yeah, this is a huge opportunity for those kinds of changes for sure. I mean, another interesting thing, because you put another great question about like, well, how has the world changed from 2010 to 2020, which is pretty amazing. But just focusing on the latter end of 2020, what's going to change for some of these things, for like sports and mass gatherings, or even here, dining is becoming much more European because outdoor dining is allowed, but not indoor dining in much of the Bay Area. So a lot of downtowns have just blocked off the road to traffic, and they've extended all of their tables into the street. And so it's pretty cool. I mean, I don't see why we shouldn't go towards that. It seems like a pretty cool model. I mean, it might present traffic problems later on once people start driving and whatnot, but it's a really interesting question to explore. You know, what changes are going to come out of this, and what are going to be permanent, what won't. So those are just
socialization. Yeah, socializing. So socializing, eating out, things like that. Work, education, travel. I'm not too sure how exactly that's going to change. But let's say, well, I'll start. Okay, so let's start with the restaurant right now. I would say that more like there's going to be more space for people to, but distancing I don't think is going to go away for a very long time, especially from, let's say, November to March or April. When flu season hits, there's going to be like all these different measures that happen. I don't see like for the next like year or 2 years, I think whenever you enter a building or you enter into a restaurant or like a church or anywhere else like that, they're going to expect you to wear a face mask whenever you enter.
I think so too.
I think that's here to stay. I think for me, I'm okay with that for now. Whether or not, because we don't know what's going to happen with the coronavirus going forward, what things are going to be like next year, I have no clue. We can only kind of guess. But the face mask wearing, social distancing, I think that's here to stay. For work, I think there'll be a little bit more flexible options where, like, as we have it right now, it's preferred that I work from home, but I can also go and work in the office if I want. And nobody keeps track of, let's say like, oh, it's 9 a.m. and Anthony's not in the office. Like, where is he? Nobody cares about that anymore. It's more of like, what is Anthony need to do by the end of, it's more focused on deadlines.
Yeah.
So what does Anthony need to do? What does Ben need to do by the end of the day? Are there actually any time commitments or appointments? If not, do what you want. Like, just get your job done, more or less. Travel. So I was in the Holy Land just before the lockdown started, and if this is crazy too, if we had done our trip the week after or the next week after we had originally planned, I don't think I would have even gone. But because like the lockdown just started, like right when I got that.
Would you have been? Would you have potentially been in the Holy Land and not allowed back into Italy? Was that a possibility?
If I think they would have let me back in because I think I have enough documents for working here to let me in. Would have been 100%. No, I don't think it would have been 100% though, because I'm not a citizen, and things got very serious very fast.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. But let's say when you're in the Holy Land, or even like in the Vatican museums here in Rome, or any experience traveling through Europe, these places, well, they call it over tourism. I've never really had a problem with over tourism because, if people have an opportunity to go travel the world, sure, go out and do that. I'm an example right now. Like we are from California. Right. I live in Rome. Could I be a sample of over tourism? Maybe, but I work here, so I have a little bit of excuse. That being said, like the Vatican museums, or the Vatican Museum's in Rome, or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which are two of the most, biggest attractions. Well, they're more pilgrimage sites than anything else. They're not really attractions. I think that's a little bit of a base word there. But pilgrimage sites that are so important that they try to push as many people as they can through as possible. And you don't necessarily feel like a person or treated like you're a person when you go through these sites. You're more treated like a pack animal or cattle, like who are kind of like shoved through different places, and you don't really have room to breathe, and it gets hot out. And it's not really like, it could be a more pleasant experience, but it's not because of the popularity of it. I think going forward, because of social distancing and reduced numbers, that travel in different parts of Europe, when you go to a museum, when you enter a church, when you enter a holy site, the numbers are going to be more restricted, and then you're probably going to have a better experience, but the access is going to be slightly more difficult. Let's say if the travel numbers do go up.
That makes sense. So can you travel, or I guess I should say, can I travel to Italy if I wanted to now, or people who don't live in Italy?
Technically, it's not possible for you. I'm already here, and I'm already here on a work basis, so it's
what about other
for me
Europeans or other? What about people from other countries, not the United States?
So there's a list of banned countries of people who aren't allowed to enter. But if you are from the EU, then you are allowed to pretty much travel wherever you want right now. For me, because I'm not I'm not a citizen of the European Union, or I'm not an Italian citizen. There could be problems if I did cross the border and then try to get back, especially with like quarantine and things like that. But if you're from the U.S. if you want to travel here, I think you need to do the mandatory 14-day quarantine,
right?
And then you can kind of do what you want. But or if you're here on essential business, you get 5 days or you have 5 days to be here, or then you have to leave, or you have to do 2 weeks of quarantine, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's just the way the rules are right now. And you just follow them.
A lot of the rules don't make sense. I wouldn't spend too much time trying to figure out how they formulate them all. Yeah, I think that's kind of similar to how it is here in the United States for, just traveling within the country itself, right? Because I know that if you want to go to Hawaii, you have to do the 14-day quarantine, and then they are going to change that September 1st. So if you want to travel to Hawaii and not quarantine, the only way to do that is if you can prove that you've tested negative for the coronavirus. And there's, I think, a 3-day window. So you would have to get tested or obtain the negative result. I don't know exactly how it works, but I think the states are going to move. I mean, it's funny. The states are essentially like little sovereign nations, like federalism has had a rebirth here. We have 50 different experiments on how are we going to legislate the coronavirus pandemic, for better or for worse.
I think that's a good thing, though, to a degree, because I think governors should be more responsible for their state's problems than we'll look to the federal government to almost solve problems that are in California, when really some problems, or a lot of problems, can be fixed by the local community or by the city, county, the governor, and always trying to look for something bigger to control everything. I don't think is necessarily. It's important to look to the federal government to handle issues within your community, but communities can solve their own problems too. It's just a matter of getting together and doing it.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing here. People have different opinions on how the response should be handled, but I think most people would agree that sometimes the local communities know better than authorities in Washington might, especially in our situation where we're really far away from them. But yeah, one of the most interesting things to me about it all is kind of like I said, you have all these different science experiments on, how are we going to stop the virus? And, New York and New Jersey, a little bit of Massachusetts and Pennsylvania were the states that seemed to be hit the hardest, especially New York, New Jersey in the beginning. And then states like Florida and Texas that had a much more hands-off approach and kind of let people do what they want seemed to be going okay, but then they had the big flare up. But then where I live, at least California, was a lot slower and more conservative in their relaxing of the shelter in place rules.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that we're also somewhat in the same boat as Texas and Florida and others. So it's just strange to me to see that there were different approaches throughout various states of both parties, different philosophies of how the spread should be contained, and more or less the same results, right? I don't know of too many states that have just done a killer job that aren't super small, where they're mostly rural without big cities.
But I think so when you go outside or you go out in public to, like for here, for instance, when I use the train, there's a remarkable difference to the way that the train seating arrangement and the way people get on and such is a lot different now than it was in February, like pre-coronavirus. So, like, is the way that people spend time in public different? Like, are people more prepared to, as a public, community, to like mitigate the virus? Or what would you say is like, are things different from February hanging out, or did people just go into lockdown and then return to life back as normal? Like,
I can only speak for the Bay Area where I've been out and about predominantly, because I haven't really been anywhere else outside of it since the lockdown occurred. But for sure, like I remember going to, even when this was first starting, right? Like in late February, early March, and people were seeing it on the news a lot more, and we're like, oh man, I don't know what's happening. And then things slowly started to shut down. Then they really quickly started to shut down. In those 2 weeks or so where everything was kind of getting decided, I was still out and about, and I remember getting dinner with people, and then nobody went anywhere. And then now I would say it's changed, right? In California, we have a mask mandate to wear if you can't social distance in public. So I pretty much wear it everywhere. And the only time in public, unless I know I can social distance, like if I'm taking a walk or something, I usually won't wear it, just around the neighborhood. But if I'm going to go anywhere to sit down or go any kind of shopping, I'll definitely wear it for that. So and I think the public has been really compliant where I live. I was telling my wife the other day, I saw one person in the grocery store without a face mask the other day, and it was so shocking. Like I hadn't seen that in very long. And most people were wearing them in the grocery stores before they had to. So I think people have been complying. They're trying to do what they can. I think there's a lot of fear. People don't know what the truth is, what to believe, what's going to happen. And, it's just pretty crazy. And then you add on to it that we're in an election year. So that just adds a whole level of insanity to it. And it's just a very strange time. That's for sure. So maybe I should get a cardboard cutout of myself.
I was thinking, like, let's say if you ordered like multiple cardboard cutouts, could you like position them in a way so that we could all like sit together? You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say if you could get like a whole section of just Anthony Johnson's.
No. That'd be too much.
That's what my wife said. She was like, I can't, if I was rich, I would do that. And I was like, why? I don't think I would do that. But I don't know. That's an interesting question. I haven't looked at it. Maybe you can pick your seats. It'd be kind of fun to do that.
Yeah. But I think back to your previous point too. So my position kind of on lockdowns is that in March and February, when all of this was starting, like in Italy, we weren't really prepared to handle something like this. In Italy in particular is like, I hate to say it, like it was kind of a prime location to have a really bad coronavirus situation because people live in really close quarters. The population is already very elderly, and many people who did die had other health problems that once you add coronavirus on top of it, then it just is very hard to defeat.
Is it true
But
that Italy has one of the highest smoking per capita
oh
populations?
yeah, for
Okay,
sure. Yeah.
I had heard
Um,
that.
yeah, it's hard not to smoke. I'll say that because everyone's smoking around you. And I'm like, no, I don't need to smoke. Please, no, I don't need to add it. But
Yeah. So it sounds like it might have been just kind of a perfect storm with some of these unfortunate factors.
yeah, and I think too, so kind of just a bad situation all around, especially from the start. And then starting from the beginning of May, mid May into June, you would see hand sanitizer all over the place. I
Mhm.
never once saw hand sanitizer anywhere in Rome, like before coronavirus. Like it was very difficult to find hand sanitizer. I'll say that right off the bat. Um, Two, people really didn't. I'd say in the United States, what shocked the numbers in the United States shocked me because most of American living is already built around social isolation. So if you look around, if you look at the suburbs in general too, like people got their house, they got their yard. If you need to go anywhere, you get in your car, you go. You go to the supermarket. The supermarkets are big. You don't really need to worry about bumping shoulders with anyone.
Relative
Here,
to Europe is what you're saying.
yeah, relative to Europe, with the exception of, I predicted this was right when the pandemic was starting. I was saying that New York is going to be was going to be hit, which it was very terribly. And I said Seattle and maybe Chicago, but I wasn't sure. But I said most of the United States is going to do pretty well. And I think I was wrong in that because, I mean, at least in terms of the case counts are pretty high regardless of where
Hmm.
you are in the United States. So that was a shock to me. But at least here, there were no measures to help mitigate the spread of disease anywhere in public, and then now it's everywhere. And let's say when you go into St. Peter's Basilica, I cannot enter St. Peter's Basilica unless I have my temperature checked, or Vatican museums or any other um, holy site or museum or anything of that nature.
Hmm.
We also have like we have a temperature gun in our office too. So if someone enters, like, you can check their temperature. If they have a high temperature, you just send them home. If not, then you just continue doing your thing. So things like that, where I mean, society, if you're sick, it's like whatever, deal with it. Like you go and you walk around, try not to get your friends sick. You hope, but if your friends get sick from you having a cold, then whatever, it's not really a big deal. You just deal with it. Now, you're sick, you stay at home. Like
Yeah.
you don't go and interact with the public, and that's a huge psychological shift there. So Italy before coronavirus, and then now Italy going with not we're not in lockdown, but we're still in state of emergency. I think moving forward, the society here is way more prepared to handle problems like this. And I was even joking the other day, it's like, I wonder what the numbers, like if everyone continues to wear the face mask in public, and we're doing this and all the way through the winter, I wonder what the amount of people who have the common cold or even just the flu in general, if that number is going to drop.
Mm.
And because if we keep on, I think Italy right now, we're doing a pretty good job at mitigating this virus. I mean, we pray and we hope it continues like that. But if we keep this up, then many other diseases, which would have been rampant, like common cold and other stuff like that, hopefully won't be as high. That's my hope.
That's a really good sentiment. Very insightful, very hopeful. I hadn't considered that.
I kind of joked it. I made a Korean War kind of reference to it, where in North Korea, North Korea, South Korea, North Koreans invade into the South, Americans and the South Koreans push them back, and then they say, oh well, now that we pushed them back across the border, why don't we see if we can just try to push them back even further and take care of business? That didn't work, of course, but like if you understand the reasoning, it's like, well, if we're already practicing the measures, then why don't we practice the measures to keep other diseases down? And then this is where I think also the economic interests start to come into play too, because if we're in lockdown or state of emergency for no good reason other than just we have to be in preventive measures, and the Americans, if we can't come here to Italy and, you know, be tourists and help uplift the economy, then that is like, that's going to be a problem. That's the one thing I see happening.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a shift economically to more domestic industry. That's not really related to tourism. I'm talking more about production, but I think people are going to have to rethink the global economy to maybe scale back a little bit, because that was one of the problems in the United States that people realized very quickly, was like, we're heavily reliant on a lot of these supply chains from other countries, and they're having these massive hiccups right now because everyone's kind of dealing with this. So there's probably going to be some thought around that from, you know, various businesses on how we redo supply chains. So I don't know about tourism. That's a little bit different. I think there's still going to be people willing to travel, but it's going to take a little bit of time for them to be able to travel. And then once they're able to, I think they'll go.
Yeah, I think so too. Are you where are you at in terms of like willingness to travel like next year? What are you thinking?
I mean, personally, I'm I'm sensitive to the disease, and I want to be cautious and respectful and do what I need to do to help prevent the spread. But at the same time, I guess I describe it as I have a little bit higher appetite for risk than other people. Um, so I wouldn't be
Yeah.
opposed to traveling at all. Um, but I probably won't be doing any out of state traveling for a while, just because with the school year around the corner and nobody really knowing what that's going to look like, I think it's going to require a little more flexibility and probably a little bit more planning up front. But even that's hard. Like, I don't even know what to plan for, because our rollout plan keeps changing. So I think for now I'm going to sit tight, but once things as they continually or hopefully continue to calm down, I wouldn't be opposed to traveling, just from a safety perspective.
Yeah, I hope people travel too. I think it's kind of you weigh the pros and cons, kind of as
Yeah.
you're doing,
Hmm.
and then you. I mean, we'll see, because I mean, there's economic interest, there's interest for the public health, public safety. We'll see what wins in the end. Right now, it looks like public health is the priority,
Yeah.
and then economically, we see what we can do. Um, Another thought too, you know, if you like, if for my desire to travel, for your desire to travel too, like for me, Italy is like already has tons of opportunities and places to go see. California is one of the most beautiful places in the world too.
Hmm.
One of the best, has some of the best weather in the world. I tell people all the time, like, Italy is great, has great weather. I've yet to been to a place that has better weather than California as a state. Like, to me, like, it
Yeah.
has some of the best. And you know, you have the ocean, you got the mountains, oh, you got the desert too. But
Yeah.
you know, there's and there's a lot of opportunity to travel in state.
Hmm.
This idea that you need to go across the world to go have an adventure, while I took that as an opportunity, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. And it's more of like a blessing and a privilege to be able to do it, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you're explaining kind of what I was saying from a production and supply chain standpoint. I guess that's
Hmm.
the truth in tourism, is that local tourism will pick up. I mean, I've definitely I've gone on a couple of trips. I went to Yosemite for a day trip, and then I also went
Cool.
to kind of by Yuba City, north of Sacramento, northeast. I went to this place called Collins Lake for a couple nights and did a camping trip there.
Yeah, I know where it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, those are I mean, Yosemite I've been to before, but I've never been to Collins Lake, and those are the kinds of places that I think people are going to travel to, the local stuff, like what you're talking about, to kind of see what the gems are in their backyard. I think I used that phrase earlier, but I think it's true. You find out what you
Yeah. So
overlooked.
yeah, I think we just need to appreciate what we have. I mean, as we're
Hmm.
both saying, appreciate what we have in front of us. Be appreciative of the life that we're living. I have a job. You have a job right now. I think things could be a lot worse. For some people, it is. For others, it's more about just like wearing, you know, going through these times and making sure that everything is taken care of, and you're doing your part to help the public good. That's more where I'm at.
Yeah, I agree with you on the gratitude, and then absolutely right. There's a lot of people that have felt this in ways I can't even imagine. So one of the things we got to do is just try to support those local establishments or businesses or even people who just need help. So, go spend your money locally. No Amazon.
Yeah, you try.
It's hard not to, but yeah. All right, my friend. Well, I don't even know how long this has been, but I'm already thinking about how
I
long
lost
this
track
file
of
is going
time.
to take to upload here.
I need to go for it.
I was going to ask, what do you got going on? Any projects that you want to tell us about before we wrap this up here that people should go check out?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So you can, for my personal account, you can find me on Instagram at AnthonySPQR. For work, one of the projects that I've invested a lot of time and energy, and we as a team at the EWTN Vatican Bureau, where we put a lot of effort into, is our Vaticano program. It's our TV program, which you can find on YouTube if you just type in EWTN Vaticano. It's a half-hour news program about the Pope and then the activities of the Vatican. Sometimes we go and we show different parts of the world, and we go there and we can't really go different places outside of Italy. But the most recent episode, we covered the Hagia Sophia and it being converted from a museum into a mosque, and what that means for like our relations with the Muslim world, with our dialogue, with how we can reach out to them and make sure that there's accord and peace in the world without there being like conflict and tension. So we tackle a lot of big questions. And then also on social media, it's at EWTN Vatican. For my own personal projects, I'm looking at starting a blog right now to highlight my own travels and where I see. I don't want to share with you the specifics yet because I'm still working on it. But essentially, I'm working on a travel site that is about making history and travel and making it more personal and part of like an experience of an adventure, rather than it just like being on a textbook or in a textbook, and it being very impersonal. Because when we study history is more about people and a relationship with a relationship with those people and the places and the environment that produce those people too. So I think we living today, when we have the opportunity to travel or even just to show content in general, what is our relationship with the people who have come in history, and then what kind of like values, ideas that they had that maybe that we can take and then apply to our own. Because there's this traditional view, I think, that there's this view that tradition and history sometimes should be pushed aside or is like considered old-fashioned, and that we need to be creative and progressive and move forward. I'm not really in that camp. I think that you can look at history, see what's worked, see what hasn't worked, take the best of it, and then apply it to your role today, and then also to you as a person, and to advance and move forward. So I'm working on kind of a travel site, a blog like that, where yes, it's about showing the world, but it's also about saying like, okay, so we are here in this environment. What can we take as a lesson from here? And you can take it, put it into your own life and into your community and better that. Because I think there's lessons to be had pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, I agree with you. And those all sound really fascinating. So I look forward to seeing those whenever they're up. I'll make sure that whenever we get this on YouTube, that all your good stuff will be linked for people to check out. So thanks for joining us, Anthony. It was a pleasure. Wish you well, and we'll do it again soon.
Mm-hmm. As we say in Italian, era un piacere.
All right, and in English.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Yes. Ciao for now.
Ciao.